So now Games Workshop has blessed us with a shiny new Warhammer 40k release roadmap. Let's do a big roundup of all the miniature releases that we know are coming out, and talk possibilities for their intriguing teasers. Hello and welcome back to Warspecs Tactics, where today I thought we could dig into Warhammer 40k's future, given that Games Workshop has given us really quite a big and pretty specific roadmap for what's going to be coming out over the next few months. And for quite a lot of the armies we know exactly what's coming, and there's plenty of hints and teasers for the ones that have not been announced. Seems that 2025 is going to be a pretty busy one for Warhammer 40k. We've already had two major army release waves with the Guard and the Eldari. We had the Emperor's Children launch box, and soon we've got the full Emperor's Children army wave coming out. After that though, it looks like Games Workshop really isn't slowing down at all. As seen by their recent release roadmap here, 4 more Codexes and 1 big launch box, all slated for now, then 4 more Codexes basically announced as the next wave of models. I expect them to be coming out around about summertime, then some intriguing possibilities for the future including some Space Marine ones, and another one of their shadowy silhouette teasers. Let's go through all of this, starting with the things that are coming out right now, and then gradually moving forward into the future for the rest of 10th edition and up to 11th. For current stuff that might be coming out in different locations, it might just be worth mentioning the store anniversary model of the Bioscience Terminator Genestealer, a sort of Space Hulk stylistic one, clutching a slain Terminator, and this one's linked to Warhammer store anniversaries, so that could be a kind of a local release if you happen to have a Warhammer store nearby and you really want this guy. They've also got other limited edition miniatures too, such as their Warhammer Plus Inquisitor. He'd be available for people signing up to the year deal for Warhammer Plus for the next few months, I suppose. Otherwise, currently for pre-order for Games Workshop, we've got Kill Team Blood and Zeal. This one's Cornate Cultists versus Imperial Cultists, the Goremongers Jackals with their bionic bounding legs, the Sanctifiers Confessor Warband for the Adeptus Sororitas and the Sororitas statue. This one sold out spectacularly fast in the US and Canada, and then lasted for a bit longer in the UK and EU, though it's still marked as sold out now, it would seem. Some discount stores might have some of them left, and there might be a few more copies going live in Games Workshop stores around the world in their physical brick and mortar ones on the 29th, but otherwise for individual releases, I suspect it might be another few months before the kill teams come out on their own. Feel free to share any other places that have it. Out of channel affiliates and sponsors, it looks like Toy Snowman in Canada still has some at 15% off at time of recording. Discount retailers won't really give them very many of these though. Alongside the miniature releases of these, I'd expect 40k datasheets to come as digital downloads, probably within the next week or so for these. Will be interesting to see exactly how they fit into Warhammer 40k armies. I guess fast-moving jackals that are perhaps a little bit more elite for the World Eaters, and then for the Sisters, the Sanctifiers will be a close-range unit with a bunch of flame weapons, maybe not differentiated massively from the Sisters in terms of unit roles. Hopefully they might get some fun special rules though. Finally, for current things on pre-order, we've got the Tank Busters and Rattlings. Tank Busters being exceptionally strong at the moment, and have 2 build options with the Breaker Boys and the Tank Buster Squad. And then the Rattlings with their fun kill team operatives, a lot of fun factor, though maybe a little bit more niche appeal. They also have that Bunker Walls terrain piece on offer as well. Talking of these guys, I'd also very strongly suspect an emergency balance patch at some point soon. A fair few tournaments are talking about banning the Orcs more Dakka thing until Games Workshop addresses it, and my guess is they'll probably do this sometime next week after Adepticon happens. They usually do a sort of follow-up mini-update after each balance pass, and just given what they've done before, like say nerfing the Necron Starshatter arsenal, I would guess that they'll probably do something similar for the Orc more Dakka detachment. I personally say that's probably odds on given their past patterns. Otherwise, going past immediate stuff, this week's releases are for 30k and the Mechanicum, might have a little bit of appeal to certain 40k Admech collectors, though just a shame that you can't fill these in current 40k. I feel like you could hand-wave an argument for most of the Admech stuff to make the jump if you wanted to, the same as the Knights and the Custodies. In any case, they'll be going up for pre-order on the 29th of March. There's the Karaknos Assault Tank, the Kryos Battle Tank, the Thanatar Calic Siege Automata, and the Ursarax Cohort. The other non-40k release that seems most likely to be on the very near horizon are the Age of Sigmar Soulblight Gravelords. They were marked as coming out now on Games Workshop's last roadmap, and that sort of feels like they've almost got to be within the next few weeks for that faction to come out. Otherwise though, the next Warhammer 40k main release wave that most people are expecting are the Emperor's Children. Games Workshop didn't even mention them on their Adepticon roadmap, which it probably implies that they're so close to coming out that they're not worth putting on the calendar. Seems like they've got very good odds to either be announced for pre-orders this Sunday or next Sunday to me, though obviously won't be 100% confirmed until Games Workshop actually say. For the Emperor's Children, there'll be 8 box sets going up: Fulgrim, Lucius the Eternal, the Lord Exultant, the Lord Cacophonous, Tormentors and Infractors, the Noise Marines Flawless Blades, and the Combat Patrol box. They'll also have the Codex and the limited edition one, plus the datasheet cards and the Fulgrim novel. Looking through those quickly, the Tormentors and Infractors are the base troops. They both look really solid in game. Tormentors being kind of god tier objective grabbers. Both Infiltrate, Sticky Objectives and OC2 are a pretty good combo. And the Infractors look very nice with their scout moves and jumping out of a Rhino alongside a Lord Exultant for a fighting melee threat. Lucius the Eternal is definitely a hyped up miniature, pretty much the iconic Emperor's Children character that they've had all this time, and it's actually got a really nice update compared with his previous model in my opinion. It looks like he's got fun rules as well with his fights first and a whole bunch of melee threat. Maybe the single biggest and most anticipated one might be Demon Primarch Fulgrim himself though. He's been hyped up for a long time, and I'm sure lots of people will be looking forward to picking him up as his 40k plastic kit. The Lord Cacophonist is the Noise Marine and apparently Terminator leader, really quite efficient for his stats for the points at the moment, to the point where he could even fairly credibly just run solo. And the Flawless Blades are the Elites of Slaanesh, with an interesting general purpose wound everything on a 3+ rule, though at really quite a big risk of one of them being destroyed if they fall short and displease Slaanesh by not killing anything. Then there's the updated Noise Marines, which a fair few people will have had already given that they came out in the Champions of Slaanesh box set in good numbers. Reimagined to basically be Emperor's Children Havocs pretty much, with some heavy close range firepower. They look like quite nice general purpose damage output. And then there's pretty much the generic Chaos Lord for the Emperor's Children in the Lord Exultant. He looks like he could be quite a good damage combo with the Infractors as mentioned. The Phoenix Spear and Rapture Lash look like quite a nice combo. And he has his Euphoric Strikes for one particularly big round of melee. Finally, for their mainline plastic kits, we've got Combat Patrol Emperor's Children, which has one set of the troops, two sets of the Flawless Blades, and a Lord Exultant. Looks like the discount on this one's probably going to be at least kind of lowish at 27%, a bit lower than some of the Combat Patrols, but not by loads. It does look like a pretty solid option though if you want to pick up the elites of the army, and I feel like you could justify more of the troops and the Lord Exultant if you picked up the Champion box due to the multi-build options. There's a chance that this one might follow the main Slaanesh release by a little bit of time though, if they want to try and sell the Flawless Blades separately first. Otherwise, for supporting things, there'll be the data sheet cards, which first came out in the Champions box set, the Fulgrim novel, which will be a cool lore update for the Demon Primarch, and then also the Codex coming out individually, which will mean that the points finally go tournament legal and they start turning up in events. Will be interesting to see how they get on. They'll also have that super fancy limited edition one like the other Chaos Deity ones, with a bunch of fancy metal tokens, that magnetic Chaos coin thing, and some cool data cards that I strongly suspect it's going to be ridiculously expensive. Before we move on to the next wave of codexes and releases though, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor in DakkaDakka.store. They wanted to share their release schedule with their 3D printing STL files on their Patreon page, aiming to make some cool stuff that could be suitable stand-ins for various grimdark wargames out there and could apply to 40k. They're well known for a few projects before, such as the Crimson Wings for some fun stylized Sanguine Angels, and I quite like their Battle Sisters range as well. Some really quite cool sculpts here for different takes on warrior nuns in power armor. For their March releases on their Patreon page, you can get all their STL files for $10 essentially, at least for the next day or two. They've got some cool, or rather Forged and Mighty themed special weapon bearers in power armor. Some alternative character sculpts which maybe feel a bit salamandery in nature. A multi-purpose infantry battle tank that could be relevant to a few different 40k factions maybe, there's a good choice of guns there. And a few takes on sculpts from some mutated Xeno cultists. They've got some bikers, some great big bio-horrors with claws, and a light vehicle as well. They've also got a good number of free designs on their website as well, which I'll link below in the video description. In any case, thanks to them for sponsoring this one. There's just a day or two left if you want to jump in on the March Patreon offerings for the $10, and they'll be linked down in the video description if you want to check them out. Back to the Codex release schedule though. As per Games Workshop's roadmap, we now have confirmation that it's the Thousand Sons, World Eaters, Death Guard and Space Wolves that are coming next. Interestingly enough, Space Wolves rather jumping up the agenda. We just got them as a vague teaser in the last one, but it seems they've hopped up the roadmap to be at the rough sort of same time as the Deity Legions that they'd already teased. My guess is that these will probably be sort of, in Games Workshop's language, the sort of spring release schedule, probably sometime between April to May to June. Given that they were announced first, it seems more likely that the Deity Legion Codexes come before the Space Wolves, maybe in some sort of crazy 3-army launch weekend. I must admit, for my own sake on covering the Codex reveals, I wouldn't be against them staggering them out a bit, but it seems at least possible they could all come at the same time. For the Chaos Codexes, the World Eaters and the Thousand Sons ones get 5 detachments and the Death Guard get 6, and these will be ones that are in a similar sort of pattern to the Emperor's Children, so having certain Chaos Demon units included into the Codex, but probably just locked to one detachment, so they're not exactly going to dominate the books. For model reveals, there was a bit of understandable disappointment that each one of the Deity Legions only got the one new miniature. It certainly seemed pretty possible to me, though I feel like the World Eaters were the ones who were most disappointed by that, given that they were really hoping for a second wave with a lot of fairly obvious stuff that Games Workshop could release, like Red Butchers Terminators, Berserker Juggernauts, or some lighter Cornate Demon Engines. What they got instead though was a single character release, a Slaughterbound who's possessed by a Bloodthirster, so basically a hyper-violent 8-bound leader, all ready to chop some folks up with that mutated chain blade growing out of his arm. Feel like he's a nice enough support character miniature, but there was a bit of hope for a bit more. He'll first come out in the Gorestorm Slaughter Pack, alongside 3 sets of 8-bound and 2 sets of Jackals. Looks like it's around about a 34% discount or so, if they charge their normal Battle Force prices for it, and around about 700 points in the box, depending on how much things change in the Codex. For these Battle Force launches, they'll likely come out at the same time as the Codex, and then the individual character miniatures will come out a fair bit later on their own. For the Thousand Sons, they got their Sekitai robots, the much hyped automata that they'd previously teased in the lore. The reception to them was maybe a little bit mid, maybe people hoping for a bit more like their Heresy era automata. Some liked them and some didn't. They looked like they're equipped with Hellfire missiles, some kind of main cannon, then the option between a heavy warp flamer and a claw in the other hand. Apparently they get some free Overwatch and also count as vehicles as well. At least it's nice enough that it's a mainline unit for the Thousand Sons as opposed to a support character. Feels like a little bit more of a win there versus token character releases. They'll first come out in their Warpflame Thrallband box, 2 sets of them alongside Exalted Sorcerers, Rubric Marines, and the Scarab Occult Terminators. Looks like this one was at least a fairly popular one out of the big discount box sets. I think it's just quite a nice, well-balanced one with a heavy focus on the new units. Could be quite a good amount of points in game, possibly around about 900 or so. Then for the Death Guard, their release is the Lord of Poxes, a leader character choice for Plague Marines, and a bit more of a standard lord than a support character like all the Feated Virion ones that they have to choose from. Quite a fun model with his massive heavy plague weapon and his sort of spore cloud generator thing. I think they said that he'd give some sort of defensive rule for Plague Marines, making them harder to shoot down. Stealth or cover seems fairly likely in that regard. He'll first come out in that Pox-wrought Vector Battle Force. Out of the recent ones that Games Workshop revealed, this was one of the ones that went down best. The 3 unique Demon Engines for the Death Guard, plus some Blightlord Terminators and the Plague Marines. Really quite a nice general purpose box set without going too heavy on any one thing. Seems like it could be useful enough both to existing players and new players. Finally, for the Deity Legions, they'll also get new Combat Patrol box sets. That could be a good thing for both the Death Guard and the Thousand Sons, hopefully no longer being quite as heavy on the Poxwalkers or Zangors, though it might not necessarily be quite so good news for the World Eaters, who had quite a good one. 20 Berserkers, a Juggernaut Lord, and Jackals was quite a nice start to a collection, and that was one of the more bought World Eaters kits. Finally, for the Deity Legions, they'll have the supporting stuff like the data cards as well, and they also have their equivalents of the great big limited edition codex covers, again with fancy metal tokens, chaos coin bits, more data card things and art prints and stuff. Apparently only 1,600 of these being made each, sold for rather extortionate prices, and then probably straight on eBay to be scalped. Then for this wave of Codex releases, it'll be the Space Wolves. We know the pattern with the Army launch boxes these days. Usually the Army launch box comes out and we get the Codex and the rules and these first kits, and then there's somewhere like a 4 to 8 week wait until the main faction release wave comes out, so this should foreshadow the actual Space Wolf release wave by quite some time. In the big army set, there's a Wolf Priest, Wolfguard Battle Leader, Bloodclaws Grey Hunters, a limited Codex and some datasheet cards. The Grey Hunters are the tactical squad equivalent, carrying chainswords and 3-shot bolt carbines. The Bloodclaws are the impetuous young recruits, charging in with berserk charges with bolt pistol and chainsword. In general, both of these battle line units have gone down pretty well, not really over heavy on the Space Wolf details, but nice to have some actual bespoke kits as opposed to just a Primaris upgrade sprue like Blood Angel's Death Company got. There's the Wolfguard Battle Leader, who I think is quite a fun sculpt, essentially a unique lieutenant but Space Wolves, with a fun storm shield and then hammer versus sword. And then the new version of Wolfguard in the Wolfguard Head Takers, essentially a Blade Guard veteran equivalent there, with axe and shield as their primary loadout, with the option to swap to an axe and sword loadout if you just want to double down on melee violence. They also come with some Hunting Wolves as well, which apparently get fielded as their own unit. I guess that they'll be the updated version of Fenrisian Wolves. Finally, there's also a Wolf Priest as well, essentially a Space Marine Chaplain who also does some apothecary things. I think they did really quite well with the unique miniature for him. That will come with Codex Space Wolves and their datasheet cards as well. They haven't really given us too many teasers as to the contents of this one besides a few datasheet hints for the revealed units. The only thing they did mention was that it'll have 3 detachments and they'll each have a saga in which you can achieve some sort of great deed with your army and get a reward for it. Maybe things like killing the enemy warlord or similar. Hopefully they wind up being fun and playable, which Games Workshop does seem to have struggled with for the majority of the detachments for the Dark Angels and Blood Angels. Then it feels like after that first wave of codexes, it seems like around the time that we'd expect a bunch of other 40k updates. A bunch of things from the latest reveal show should probably crop up sometime around now. We've got the Armageddon Crusade book, a chapter approved mission deck along with the balance update in summer, and then Kill Team Typhon. I'd guess that most of these will turn up sometime towards the end of spring, start of summer. For the Armageddon Crusade book, this one's going to be a fun one for the lore, I think, representing a World Eater's crusade smashing into Armageddon and Angron being unleashed on the planet once again. It seems fairly clearly aimed to tie in with the latest wave of Codex releases, as we've got Grey Knights, Black Templars and Space Wolves all pitted against them. Just incidentally being the 3 Loyalist Astartes codexes coming around now. This have 43 pages worth of lore and background, and a tree campaign with branching possibilities. I feel like they often have some pretty interesting narrative stuff in these books. I'd guess that the Crusade supplement might well be sooner rather than later. I feel like there often tends to be at least a fairly short lag time between the announcement of these and their release. Otherwise, we've got the new chapter approved mission set. They usually have one of these per year, and if going by last year, it'd probably be sort of late May, early June. This one's simply called 2025 to 2026, as opposed to being themed around any particular war zone. For this one, there's a bit of a shake-up with different ways to play. They'll still have the 2,000 point Strike Force ones, which I guess will be the ones that the competitive game's most interested in, but then also have more tailored missions specific to Incursion, to try and make the game work a bit better in a tailored way for 1,000 points, as opposed to just essentially have the same missions there. And then also a rather fun-looking asymmetric mission design, where you have different armies with different deployment zones and maybe different objectives. That seems like it could be a cool way to shake it up as well. This one will also feature a challenger card mechanic, which will have a sort of catch-up thing. If you're laggy in victory points, then it looks like you get some free stratagems or small scoring advantages. Might be nice to try and make games just a tiny little bit closer, though occasionally maybe could have weird effects, perhaps for armies that were not really planning on scoring loads of points right away, but more tabling and then scoring towards the end of the game potentially. The chapter approved updates will come with the next balanced data slate. We just had the last one in mid-March, so this one seems most likely to be around the sort of time of early to mid-June. They tend to be more roughly in 3-month intervals. This one might be a bit more disrupted, seeing as it's actually coming out alongside a physical product in those cards. We know the drill with this one at the moment: updated points, FAQs and errata, and new detachments for a bunch of armies now, which is something they've started doing as of the last one. Hopefully they manage to make things a bit less broken than more Dakka this time. There is a good chance that this will be an extra big one, given that it's the start of a new season. In the Pariah Nexus one, they did all sorts of crazy things, including changing up the core movement mechanics of Warhammer 40k. It feels like if they want to make any major changes to how people play 10th edition before 11th comes out, this would be the time to do so. So I basically expect a larger digital update as opposed to a smaller one. Feels likely that this might be the time where they do Chaos Demon updates as well. It does sound like there's more to come in terms of changes for the Demon Index that's digital. At the very least, we basically know that they're going to rewrite the Summon Demon Allies kind of rules to a greater or lesser extent, given that that just doesn't really work well with the Deity Legion rules that they've got coming out. I suspect that the Deity Legions won't be able to ally, say, Khorne Demons in any other way besides their one bespoke detachment for it. I don't know if that might have implications for allied demons to Chaos Marines and Chaos Knights. We'll wait and see there. Otherwise, at some point I'd strongly suspect that the Finecast models not in production to vanish from the digital index, things like Epidemius or the Blue Scribes. I'd still be apprehensive of other things that Games Workshop suddenly decide doesn't really fit the setting, like they seem to do with the Seeker Chariots. Finally, for things that seem to be likely in the sort of mid-term future, there's Kill Team Typhon. This one's the Tyranid Raveners versus Admech Servitors, next versus box set for Kill Team. And in this one, there's the new Tyranid Raveners, the Admech Battleclade, a Techno-Archaeologist for the Admech, Hormagaunts for the Tyranids, a bunch of Kill Team terrain, and the usual Kill Team rules and counters and things. If they're going by sort of 3 monthly updates for Kill Teams, then again this one would be around about June time most likely. Just judging by the content, with a bonus character and a bunch of Hormagaunts in here more so than other Kill Team launch sets, I really wouldn't be too surprised if this one winds up being fairly significantly more expensive than the last 2 Kill Team releases. But if not, then it will look like it could be a very good deal. This is also the time that I'd expect the Sanctifiers and the Goremongers to come out individually. It seems they like to group Kill Team releases together. They have the Tank Busters and Ratlings come out at the same time as the Blood and Zeal one. For the actual miniatures though, the Tyranids get an updated version of their Burrowing Raveners. 5 in the squad now rather than 3, so it sounds like they'll be quite a mighty prospect to take on. All of them apparently able to be assembled as either regular Ravener warriors or the 5 Kill Team specialists that you can see here. There's a Prime in the top left corner, and then ones that spit venom have envenomed claws, big crushing claws and a sort of sensor array type thing perhaps. Often with kill team rules, some of the equipment but not all of it gets 40k rules. I think they're quite fun miniatures in any case. For the Admech, they basically get the return of their servitors with the servitor battle clade. These are led into battle by a techno-archaeologist, and then there's an underseer commanding the servitors. Looks like you get 8 servitors in the box, 2 gun ones, a bunch of specialist ones including a medic servitor, and then some combat ones which I think might have phosphor blasters on their arms. I think it is quite nice to see a more standard servitor unit return to the faction. They're certainly one of the more iconic things in 40k, and would feel weird that the Admech didn't have them. Otherwise, the third kit in the box is the Tyranids terrain. Quite nice to see some faction-specific terrain here. They've got some nice spore chimneys, a brood nest, and some big gestation sacks. I feel like given the popularity of Tyranids out there in 10th edition, there's a good chance that a fair few people want to get their hands on this one. After all of those medium-term releases, next up we've got the next codexes for Warhammer 40k. These are now confirmed to be the Imperial and Chaos Knights, the Black Templars, and the Grey Knights. In previous roadmaps, they'd given us teasers of these ones. Now we've got 100% confirmation. I'd guess that these might be around about the sort of summer release slot for Games Workshop. If I had to guess, I'd put these anywhere between sort of mid-June to early September. For the order of them, maybe most likely is Grey Knights would be the first out of them, given that we've actually got their model reveal, as you can see here. Usually they tend to reveal the codex that's coming next first. And I feel like given that there's 4 codexes here, there's at least a fair chance they might well share a release weekend with the Black Templars. I certainly strongly expect that the 2 Knight books will come out on the same release weekend though. As well as that though, we basically know what happens for codexes in 10th edition. They generally get one new model at least, they get a new combat patrol, often worse, and they usually get a one and done Battle Force box set that's been revealed for the Grey Knights and the Deity Legions, but we don't know the identity of that for the Black Templars, presuming they're getting one. Knights don't get combat patrol box sets, but feel like definitely an intriguing possibility if they wind up getting Battle Force discount deals. Also, the bit that's probably missing from this bit of the roadmap is the Space Wolves as well. As mentioned, they'll have their launch box and then their 4 release wave something like 4 to 8 weeks after. And Games Workshop did say they're getting a whole bunch of other kits as well. So they'll have their 4 release weekend with everything in their launch box, plus a bunch of other stuff besides. For the Grey Knights, they're the codex reveal that we've just had. Probably the biggest news is that they're not getting their full army range update in 10th edition, but feels like with the rollout of Space Marine chapter updates, we've had the majority of the Divergent chapters and Black Templars over the past edition and the one before that, so it feels like they've almost certainly got to be one of the next in line. I'd be kind of surprised if we don't get something major for them in 11th. In the codex they'll have 5 detachments apparently, including a vehicle and walker focused one called a Sanctic Spearhead. Their miniature reveal wasn't exactly the most overwhelming one. They basically got a new Dread Knight sprue, basically the regular Nemesis Dread Knights but with Grandmaster parts added into the mix, which admittedly does add some fun wargear option for that datasheet. It means they've got a great big melter weapon called a Subliminator with quad barrels, a massive Nemesis force weapon that can now be fielded with a flail and mace as well as the regular options. It looks like he's acquired some sort of chest-mounted grenade launcher, which seems a bit weird and uncertain from where it fires from. I don't know if those are missiles or sort of fragstorm grenades. Besides that, there's a few aesthetic parts, an iron halo for the Grandmaster and some different knee pads. Still though, it wasn't exactly the best received kit, given that it's basically an upgrade sprue rather than a whole new miniature, and the Dread Knight isn't exactly the best loved of the 40k kits. I feel like people would have reacted a lot better to a full resculpting of it, as opposed to doubling down on the current model. Their Battle Force box set seems like quite a simple one in the Sanctic Conclave. Looks like it's 2 sets of Terminators, 1 Strike Squad and a Dread Knight with the Grandmaster upgrades. It seems that even if you allow a fair bit of extra cost for the Grandmaster sprue within the Dread Knight kit, this one's still going to be a box set without that much discount, only around about the 17% lower or so, which really isn't too much to sell it. It's still going to have a fair few points in the box given that it's Grey Knights, but it does look like this one's got the short end of the stick discount-wise versus the Deity Legion Battle Forces. Grey Knights will also get a new combat patrol as well, which might not be the best news in the world given that you can basically buy 3 of them at the moment and have a really quite balanced Grey Knight army. It just seems that if they redo it, it's going to get worse if anything. Otherwise, I'm going for the unrevealed codex content. We've got the Black Templars. I think for them, no one's really expecting them to get another massive release wave, given that Games Workshop did a fairly completist one in 9th. If it's a single character, maybe something like a generic Black Templar chaplain, a Terminator character, or a banner bearer could be nice. When I asked Black Templar players for a poll what they'd like, the top choices tended to be things like a unique Terminator variant, maybe similar to the Dark Angels Deathwing Knights, or maybe a unique Dreadnought variant, possibly even the return of a Chaplain one perhaps, and again they'll also get a redone Combat Patrol box. Then we've got the Knight books, as mentioned probably going to come out at the same sort of time, and does seem that at least the Chaos Knights will be getting a new miniature at the very least. We had this great big siege drill on a recent Rumour Engine that's got some Chaos Knight spikes on it round the edge, and it fits quite well with I think one of Chapter Master Valrak's rumours, which mentioned a Knight variant having one of these. Feels like for the Chaos Knights it could just be on the Abhorrent chassis, given that the Loyalists got 2 different expansions for their own one, first with the Gallant upgrades and then with the Preceptor and Canis Rex. It is kind of notable that the current Chaos Knight Abhorrent and Abominant one, that's off sale, so one reason for that could potentially be because they're adding this sprue in. They also have the Loyalist Questor Knight out of production right now. It could just be repackaging with new rules and things for the Codex, but again it could be the potential to add an extra sprue or even separate it out into different box sets. Recently for the Knights we did see some updated stat lines in the packaging as well. They appear to be lower toughness values but more wounds. We don't know at the moment whether that's meaningful or not. They could have just been a draft profile like we saw towards the start of 10th, or could be a genuine glimpse of the future as to big changes that are happening for the army. Finally, for this sort of time period, we've got the Space Wolves full release wave. Games Workshop absolutely confirmed that there's more kits coming for the Sons of Rus, and a specific phrase that they used in their reveal show was more characters and more elite units. They used plurals on both of those. I guess that implies 4 more kits, though it's probably not worth reading too much into semantics. For the kits that seem most likely to get updates, I feel like Logan Grimnar is basically 100% guaranteed. No way that they do away with him, and we also got teased artwork of him. Bjorn the Fell-Handed again has been kind of weirdly pushed in social media posts on a bunch of different occasions. Games Workshop just seemed unusually keen to remind us that he exists over the past year. Wolfguard Terminators seem one of the most likely. They even mentioned them when they talked about the Space Wolf Head Takers. And maybe if I had to guess for another elite unit, I might go for Wolfen. I'm not 100% sure whether or not they necessarily need a resculpt though. They could just keep the same models as the sort of a bit weird and warped compared with regular Space Marines anyway. They seem very likely to get an upgrade sprue as well, similar to the Blood Angels and the Dark Angels ones. We do know for basically guaranteed that a bunch of stuff will be going Legends. There's only 20 datasheets in the Codex, and there's 35 datasheets in the Index, so that means that we're losing 15, and because we're gaining both the Wolf Priest and the Wolfguard Battle Leader in Power Armor, that means that another 2 slots will be taken up, so 2 more will be lost. There's a whole bunch of characters which I guess the majority of which are probably going to go Legends, but I guess that we probably will get at least a couple more named characters reimagined in Primaris form. Maybe Njal Stormcaller seems like one of the most likely to me. I guess it's possible that we could get a generic Wolf Lord as well, maybe in the same way that Black Templars got their Marshal. I think one of the biggest questions at the moment is whether or not Thunderwolves will be updated with new models or even survive in general. Something Games Workshop didn't decide to answer when they were asked it very specifically in their reveal stream. I certainly hope that they're not gone given that they're one of the fan favourite units, even if they were a bit of a jumping the shark kind of idea when they first came out. Finally, the other big question is whether Leman Russ himself will make an appearance. We know we're getting 1 returned Primarch in Fulgrim in 2025, it's possible there could be another. At this point I still feel like it's probably most likely to be in an end of edition campaign like the Lion came out if I'd had to guess. Though for all we know we're going to get a big reveal for him at the next reveal show. Then looking past that, Games Workshop gave us some more murky teasers of the future. They basically reprinted the Salamanders teaser that they'd given us last time, a Salamanders Marine in Gravis armour, coming from existent artwork, added an Imperial Fist similar one to the mix as well, and then also gave us a shot of a Leagues of Votann artwork. I feel like this didn't really add all that much more than what we knew, but it is kind of interesting that because we've both got teasers specifically for Salamanders and Imperial Fists, it does heavily imply actual chapter-specific content, as opposed to that Salamanders Marine just being an individual Space Marine teaser, and what was actually coming was a bunch of generic Space Marine kits. On top of that, they also gave us this Raven Guard teaser too, which feels like it was in very similar kind of scope to the Space Wolf one that they did last time, quite clearly an Astartes just from looking at it. It didn't take very long for the internet to find the answer to that one. Looks like people have posted the solution on Reddit really quite quickly after it was shown. Again, that's another very specific chapter. Seems that it might be a full release wave for literally every single one of the Codex chapters again. I feel like if we've got Salamanders, Imperial Fist and Raven Guard, then there's a good chance that both White Scars and Iron Hands won't be left out either. It might feel a little bit mean to release things for some of them but not the rest. For the chapter teasers, they're Primaris Marines from existing artwork, and I feel like their teasers are maybe some of the biggest question marks given that we know that Space Marines already have their Codex for 10th edition. I guess they could surprise us by pulling a 2nd edition Codex, but it could also be something that's just very different in pattern. Maybe something like the supplement book things that they did in 8th edition for the Space Marines, where they had individual content for Imperial Fist, Salamanders and the rest. Games Workshop did that in 8th edition, and they paired it with the Shadow Spear box set where they had a bunch of Phobos Marines and a few other things like the Invictus Tactical Warsuit, and I think the Impulsor came out then. And then in 9th edition they did have some other things with some chapter-specific battle forces, plus that Strike Force Agastas one. It almost seemed like Games Workshop had initially planned on releasing some supplemental chapter content in late 9th, but then decided against it. It'll be interesting to see what they come out with though. Seeing as we're getting multiple teasers for multiple specific chapters, my guess is that it'll probably be at least some sort of miniature for each of them, and the most obvious one for a bunch of them would be the Space Marine characters that conspicuously remained in the Codex despite being made of resin. Games Workshop's removed support for the vast majority of resin miniatures in Warhammer 40k and 10th edition, but a bunch of the Space Marines stayed, including ones that didn't even have models on sale. I strongly suspected at the time that these ones were characters that had enough standing that they would probably warrant their own plastic sculpts at some stage, and this could be a possibility for that. It means that we've got some really obvious choices for some of them, like Vulcan Hestan of the Salamanders, Darnath Lysander of the Imperial Fists, Cato Sicarius for the Ultramarines, and maybe even Pedro Cantor of the Crimson Fists. Cato Sicarius was seen in some past artwork. I guess otherwise for specific chapters they could do something like actually make a full unit for them. I feel like it would be really cool to see something like a bunch of Imperial Fists with maybe bolters and breacher shields or similar. Maybe Salamanders elites with some hammers or melter weapons or both. It'd be just quite cool to have one unit that's just seen as the pinnacle of their chapter for each of the chapters. We did also have this Rumour Engine as well, which could be a generic Space Marine vehicle, or could be something like a jet bike character, maybe Samael or a White Scars character. Though the engines may be a bit non-specific and could fit with a whole bunch of Primaris vehicles, could be a tank or a Stormspeeder variant. Beyond chapter-specific stuff, it would be more of a surprise than not if they didn't come out with some Space Marine new stuff at some point late in the edition. In 8th edition we had Shadow Spear, in 9th edition we had Strike Force Agastas, and both of these added a whole bunch of new sculpts and units to the Primaris range. I strongly suspect that we'll see something similar. For the Space Marines, there's a massive amount of obvious choices for the Last of the Firstborn range to get updated. Vanguard Veterans and Assault Terminators, I'd say, are near 100% guarantees to get a remake when Games Workshop get around to them. Maybe it's more of a case of whether or not they come out in late 10th edition, or if they're part of a launch box for 11th or something. Given that we've got the Hover Predators for the Gladiator tanks, again at some point I would be surprised if we don't get similar for the Whirlwind and Vindicator. Though I must admit I really wouldn't be against seeing some Primaris tracked vehicles. I think a lot of people are maybe a little bit mid on the hover stuff. And there's plenty of other possibilities between that. I guess at some point we might see some sort of siege variant of the Ironclad, or they could redo other things like the Landspeeder Storm. And then there's still the question of what happens to Devastators and Tactical Squads. Will they just literally get dropped and Desolation Squads and Intercessors be the way forward, or will they have some sort of reinterpretation where they too get unique sculpts out? There's loads and loads of stuff beyond this, though that's probably a subject for a video all of its own at some point. Otherwise though, beyond mysterious Space Marine things, we've also got the Leagues of Votann Codex. It looks like by the release schedule, they might be coming out at almost the exact same time in the edition compared with when they did in 9th, and people are strongly expecting that they might have a follow-up wave this edition to expand their roster with a bunch of new stuff. I feel like jump infantry for them are near enough confirmed given that we already had the one in their Half King Kill Team box set. I just don't see why they would have designed one like this if they didn't have a unique unit coming. We had another couple of Rumour Engines that look quite likely to be Votann, in particular this Toolbox one definitely is, and the Scanner Pack one feels odds on to me. Hopefully they'll get another follow-up release wave that makes them into a more well-rounded army. Perhaps obvious tropes that they could go down besides the jump infantry could be some sort of walker, which could be robots or crewed vehicle sort of equivalent, or maybe a land speeder equivalent vehicle. There'd certainly be loads of room for extra special characters if they wanted, and just generally a lot of freedom with all sorts of things they might choose to design. Again, they'd likely get a redesigned combat patrol, and at least a reasonable chance for a Battle Force box coming out if they did get a relaunch wave. Lastly, and now we've had it confirmed that Chaos Demons are not getting a Codex in 10th, that just literally leaves Drukhari last, which on the one hand could be slightly annoying news for 40k's Dark Eldar, but also probably good news in the way that it probably means that they get a release wave for their army. The last few months of an edition do tend to be a good time to release codexes that have release waves, as then there's a bit more interest in starting collecting the army then, perhaps to outweigh the fact that a new edition might be just around the corner and rules might not be lasting for as long. If they do get a launch wave, then the Drukhari is certainly an army that needs it. There's 4 of their units that were made of resin and then just retired from the range: Grotesques, the Court of the Archon, the Beastmasters, and Urium Rakath. And while maybe Urium was okay, I feel like the previous 3 kits just weren't really fit for purpose in the first place, at least in terms of just having one unit that you could buy. So getting all of those redone in plastic would certainly be really quite high up the agenda. On top of that, there's plenty of other things that they could do for the faction. I think the one that everyone would quite like to see would be Astrobel Vex. It's certainly one of the big bads of the Warhammer 40k setting, and feels like coming out alongside an end edition campaign could be the sort of time that we might expect to see him materialise, and that would be really fun if so. and they had loads of potential for named characters that they had removed from the lore, things like Lady Malice, Duke Slices, and a bunch of other named ones. This is definitely a bit speculative, but I feel like having them being the only codex that hasn't been named yet, and when we had major release waves for Votann, Guard and World Eaters last year, and they were the last 3 codexes, Drukhari feels odds on to me. There certainly remains to have any sort of confirmation, and there's no telling how much support Games Workshop might give them if they do even get a release wave. That's the majority of it for Games Workshop's codex schedule, though there's a few more interesting hints and teasers. Some sort of energy weapon on the left, which could be anything from Space Wolf Hellfrost to Necron Tech, or some in Leagues of Votann. I've seen various people speculate. I guess if it's a Hellfrost weapon, then maybe it could be for Beyond the Fellhanders. There's something that looks like a Pale Spear, so sort of similar to Alpha Legion tech there. Could be something for the Horus Heresy, but otherwise maybe could be something like an Alpha Legion's upgrade sprue, in a similar sort of style that Games Workshop did Night Lords, and there was a rather intriguing set of missiles as well. I guess maybe something either Space Marine or Leagues of Votann from first impressions of that. Definitely could be other things though, maybe Imperial or Chaos Knights. On top of that, I'm sure there'll be plenty more Kill Team releases. These tend to be a bit of a wild card, but usually good fun, seeing as we've just had the Raveners one and the Admech one just announced. I guess we won't hear too much on them for a while, particularly given that we only just had Blood and Zeal go live. And then Horus Heresy could be an interesting one to keep an eye on as well. I believe there's been rumours of a new edition at some time recently that could always have interest for people who want to get a whole bunch of Space Marines on the cheap. In particular, a whole load of the older armour marks tend to be really quite appropriate for the Chaos Space Marines. Otherwise, I'm sure they'll go round their other factions in the Heresy until everything's eventually updated into plastic. Despite having some big release waves, there's still a bunch of stuff for the Solar Auxilia and the Mechanicum range. They've done some of the Relic Knights, but not all of them. We've still got the Cerastus Atropos, the Megara and the Starix for the Questoris versions, plus the Armiger Moirax. I really wouldn't be too surprised to see them all turn into plastic eventually. They would certainly enjoy it if Games Workshop could actually put them into the Knight Codex, so that 40k players aren't worried about them pulling a sort of 10th edition Space Marine thing on them, and suddenly throwing all those datasheets into Legends. Finally, another one of the most intriguing things on the horizon will be Forge World Custodes and Sisters of Silence units going plastic. They're pretty much the only Heresy era faction that they haven't touched with plastic updates, provided they keep on supporting the Horus Heresy into the long future. This seems 100% guarantees that they'll get to them. They're a popular army, and again that could have some pretty massive implications for the 40k Custodes armies. I think a lot of people would jump on the opportunity to get Telemon Dreadnoughts, Caladius tanks and others in plastic, given that the Custodes core range is quite so cheap for 40k. Versus the Forge World range being quite so expensive. Otherwise, beyond other game system releases, after the Codex launch schedule, there's likely to be the End of Edition campaign. This one's taken various forms over the past few editions, the Fall of Cadia sequence in 7th, then Psychic Awakening in 8th, and Arcs of Omen with the Boarding Actions expansion in 9th, usually a good time for a bunch of narrative to come up, and generally seems to be tied in with certain dramatic characters coming back or getting a new miniature update. It just feels like the sort of time I'd expect to see models like maybe Huron Blackheart, Pedro Cantor, Trazin the Infinite, or Primarchs like Lionel Johnson turn up. No idea exactly who or what they'd focus on, but feels to me like there'd be at least a reasonable chance to tick off a couple of things on that list. Then at the end of that, we'd get 11th edition Warhammer 40k. I'd be very surprised if they deviate in any way from their 3-year launch cycle that's been so successful for them over recent years. And that'll be around June 2026, so probably around about 1 year to go or so by their normal calendar. I'd guess they'd probably do a soft reset as opposed to a hard reboot like the transition from 9th to 10th. Keep all the codexes but just change the core rules around and maybe do some digital updates. And then no doubt their usual big launch box sets with masses of new Space Marines on one side versus some antagonist foe. Seems that people seem to be most bullish on Orcs getting it, though it could be some sort of big surprise like Dark Mechanicum or something. And probably further Space Marine updates are going to bring a final reckoning for the Firstborn. I'd just be kind of surprised if there's too many Firstborn units left standing after 11th edition release waves come out. All that's a fair bit away though yet, certainly over a year of 10th edition to go. And as mentioned, lots and lots of models releases, army books and more. Finally, there's always the question as to whenever Vashtor turns up again to do something Dark Mechanicum related. They've been easily the most fan-requested army for a good amount of time yet. Games Workshop has ticked off the vast majority of fan-requested factions over the years. I'd just be very surprised if we don't get a 40k version for them sooner or later. I'd probably guess sometime in 11th edition, though who knows, maybe their Year of Chaos might actually turn up to live up to its expectations a bit more. If they did pull some sort of big surprise and have a Dark Mechanicum faction turn out towards the later end of it, probably seems unlikely on balance to me still though. In any case though, seems like we've got a much better picture for what's coming when for the majority of the rest of 10th edition. Games Workshop's roadmap has definitely been pretty helpful on that regard. Look forward to hearing your takes as to what you think is going to be coming next for Space Wolves and the rest, and which are the releases and armies that have most interest to you coming up over the next few months. As mentioned, a big thank you to DakkaDakka.store for sponsoring the video. Feel free to check out their Patreon page linked down in the video description below if you want to pick up some STL files for some big gun tanks, cultist bikers and special weapons with power armor. I'll leave this one there for now though. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments and feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming with new ones out just about every day. If you've been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support and keep the videos coming. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.